I was blue, just as blue as I could be. Every day was a cloudy day for me. Then good luck came a-knocking at my door. Skies were gray, but they're not gray anymore. Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebirds singing a song, nothing but bluebirds all day long.
This is a story about love and loyalty. My name is Giselle Gigi Hyman Retain, and what you are about to hear is a compelling and touching Holocaust story. But it is foremost a tale of survival, resourcefulness, resilience, devotion, and even joy in the face of desperation and fear of the unknown. It is the story of my cousin, Margot Grünfeld Shafran, who, through her heroic acts, time and again, saved herself, her parents, and her extended family during the turbulent years of World War II and then beyond. This beyond continued with the enlistment of her like-minded, valiant young soldier husband, Richard Dick Shafran, to include the tenacity to rescue and provide a safety net to the part of Margot's family. Her valor even included rescuing my parents and providing for their safety as they worked to resurrect and establish themselves after the Shoah. Margot was a devoted daughter to her parents, Reuben and Lotte Grünfeld. In ways you are about to hear, she was and is a constant source of support and ballast to her cousin, my mother, Lotte Grünfeld Heime. Their bond began in Berlin, Germany in the 1920s, where Margot, an only child, was a vivid presence in the home of her widowed aunt, Anna Esche Grünfeld, my grandmother. As Hitler's noose tightened, the families scrambled, and both cousins found refuge in the Shanghai Ghetto. Margot and her parents emigrated first in August of 1939, which is what gave Lottie and Kurt and family the courage and the impetus to follow in September of 1940. Lottie told herself that no matter how bad the conditions could be, she could make it with the secure feeling that her cousin shared her fate. Margot never missed an opportunity to extend a helpful hand, a morsel of rice, or a rickshaw ride. In a way that you are about to hear as Margot's story unfolds, she left the Shanghai Ghetto in 1946, 2 years ahead of my parents, with her knight in shining armor. Margot engineered and provided the affidavit with the help of her gallant husband Dick Shafran for my parents, Kurt and Lottie Hyman, and for my brother Manfred to enter the United States in 1948. And thus Manfred later renamed himself Dick because of his admiration for his larger-than-life cousin and role model. Dick and Margot settled in Poughkeepsie, New York, with Dick's family and their adored children, Ronald and Ann. Kurt and Lottie Hyman settled in Denver, Colorado, with Kurt's parents, his brother, my brother, and me. Though miles apart, the outpouring of love and support did not diminish. We were constant and continual recipients of care packages that reminded us that we had a family to depend on. Most memorable for me was that I grew up wearing all of the lovely clothing that my cousin Anne, 2 years my senior, had grown up in. It was a beautiful and shared experience across the miles and over decades. This is part of the early connection between us that has only been enriched and strengthened over the years. Margot's generous outpouring of love and maintaining of family bonds over a lifetime have been rewarded in so many ways. The ultimate rewards are her opportunities to rejoice in the renewal of life with her grandchildren, Spencer and Genevieve, and her great-grandchildren, Francis, Pascal, and Charlotte. Margot Grünfeld Shafran's epic life story is an ever-present reminder that ultimately good can, and inspiring ways does, triumph over evil.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sitting here with my very lovely cousin Gigi, who has been after me to record my story. I guess it's a long story because I'm not a youngster anymore, but I can start with where I was born. I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1924, and my name is Margot Shafran now. My maiden name is Grünfeld or Grünfeld. I have a little bit of family, but we're very, very close, and I love all my family dearly. So being that we were very close with both our families, the Seckers, my mother's family, and my father's family, the Grünfelds. And my mother was expecting me around that time. And finally, I was born January 10th, 1924. My uncle, my father's brother, became very ill. And when did he die? He passed away
January 19th.
January 18th. The one good thing was that he had been praying that he wanted to make sure whatever baby comes out should be healthy, and that he lived long enough to know that I was born and I was healthy. And that was a big relief for the whole family that he was able to hold on to till I was born. My very important family is Lottie and Kurt Heime, and their daughter is Gigi, who is recording me, and they have a son, Dick Hyman, who lives in Oregon. And unfortunately, like I said, we don't get together very often, but Gigi is here now so that I can make this recording and leave it for the children, and they will someday appreciate knowing where I came from and what I've done. I will start that I was born, like I say, in Berlin, and at that time they had just built a Jewish school in Berlin. That was the only Jewish school, and in 1932 I enrolled in that school and was in the Auguststraße in Berlin. It was a beautiful school. Everything was brand new, and every subject that we learned was very important. And at that time, a lot of attention was paid to the Hebrew language, which is called Ivrit. And even at that age, from 6 years on, we learned to speak and read and write Ivrit. That is not the same language or the same writing that is in our prayer books. This is a live language that started in Israel at that time, when a lot of youngsters, young people, were trying to get out because by 1933, things did not look good. The Nazis were marching on the streets, and we were afraid, but not thinking that it would come to a terrible end. So a lot of people didn't even believe that anything bad was going to happen. It's just another person taking over Germany. Well, it ended up that Hitler wanted to make Germany Judenfrei. That means no Jews should live actually anywhere in the world, but definitely out of Germany. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what happened in Germany, but I assume you do, and know of the concentration camps, which happened later on. And there were some of our Jewish people, like I had an uncle who had fought in the First World War and could not be convinced that anything bad was going to happen to him because he was a German Jew. But he had fought in the war and thought that he was really a German. His wife, Regina, was my mother's sister, and they had 3 children. There was Manfred, who was a year older than I am, right? And his sister Eva, and another sister Ruth. There were 3 children by the name of Fenster. I might just as well talk about the Fensters right now. When, after everything that happened, we tried everything we could to find out what happened to the Fenster family. And they were all, their date of birth, and the year that they died, and it was called verschollen. They're not dead, they went verschollen. That means they all died in concentration camps. Now back to my story. My mother worked for the Jüdische Gemeinde, that means the Jewish Central Committee. And that happened by pure accident. She met a woman who was cooking and taking care of tiny children, pre-kindergarten, pre-nursery school. And we were walking along the street, and she begged my mother to help her. She had a bad day, and there was nobody to replace her. So my mother, good-hearted as she was, said, of course. So we went right into the nursery school, and my mother was familiarized with what her job would be. And she wasn't looking for any job, but this sort of came to her. And when she saw all the little children, she fell in love with the whole idea of being around them and doing a good deed. At that time then, the kindergarten, the nursery, wasn't the kindergarten, the nursery found a nice place on the Elsasser Straße. And it had the whole floor of a building they took over, and in the back they reserved it for my parents and myself to live there, and that somebody was always on the premises. None of the children ever slept over at night, but this way we sort of were the look out that nothing should happen to that area. And we lived there until 1932. Then the whole school was dissolved. I think it was 32 or maybe 34. It could have been 34. So my father was a tailor, and he worked in a place with other men being on the sewing machine. And my mother's sister, who was married to a man named Fenster, she did home sewing, and people would come and pick out designs, and her husband would cut. She would sew, and so would my father. So they worked together. But I also was very, very close with my father's side of the family, who were Grünfelds. My father had a brother by the name of Leo Grünfeld. And both of them came from Poland in about 1914, as far as I know. They were born in Tarnów, Poland. They came to Berlin. My father married my mother, whose name was Lotte Secher, and his brother married a woman, I don't know her maiden name. These Grünfelds had 3 children. There was 4 children, excuse me. There was a daughter, Giselle. That's why we have a Gigi now. A son by name of Adi, actually was Adolf, but nobody called him by that name. He was Adi Grünfeld. And another sister by the name of Lotte Grünfeld. My father was born in 1888 in Tarnów, Poland. His brother was born in Tarnów, but I'm not sure of the date. So the 2 brothers came to Berlin, and my father became a tailor, but mostly in confection. That means mass production, being on the sewing machine. While when I told you my mother's sister's husband, they were designer clothing. They had one room, and women would go to them and pick out styles, and my uncle Fritz, or Siegfried, that was his name, he was able to cut out designs and then have 3 try-ons on the person to make sure that's how they, whether they were satisfied and how everything fit. So everything was, everything was made to order and by exact measurements of the person. So it was not a wholesale or a big manufacturer at all. These were homemade clothes by designers. So now let me get close to the year 38 and 39. By then, the Nazis became huge. They were marching on the streets day and night in their boots and their horrible uniform. And the more they were marching, the more afraid we Jews had to be, because by chance they would just hit anybody on the street. For instance, I had one uncle who was riding his bicycle, and he was called a name, So he jumped off his bicycle, tried to run after the person that called him a dirty Jew. They caught him and put him in a prison. And from there they were going to put him in a concentration camp, which wasn't talked about very much. People didn't really know that there were concentration camps. Well, my father got very busy with the Jewish agency and was able to get my Uncle Max with his family. He had a wife named Erna and 2 children, and they were sent to Montevideo by the Jewish Agency of Berlin. So when they left, we had no idea what happened to them. On the other hand, the family Grünfeld, my cousins, Mary and Max, and my cousin Adolf, they somehow managed to get to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro. In 1938, October, I think it was 28th of October, we heard a very harsh sound on our door, knocking. We thought somebody was going to knock the door down. And my mother went to the door, my father, out of bed. It was very early. And this was the German police. It was not the Gestapo. It was not anything from the Hitler Youth. This was the regular police department. Two officers came, told my father to get dressed, that he could take a little bit of food and put some warm clothes on him, and that he would be gone. And nothing else. We had no idea where they were taking him or what was going to happen to him. And it was absolutely the worst thing that could happen to my mother and myself at 5:30 in the morning. We were shaking and make sure my father got dressed warm, and had absolutely no idea what was going to happen to him or to us. So after they took him and we got dressed, my mother and I ran out on the street, and sure enough, we saw some other women running. And we're all talking, we are our husband, we are our fathers. So we worked ourselves over to the police department. And there were a lot of women standing. And then finally the word filtered down that these men would be put on trains and sent to Poland. And then we found out that all of us had Polish citizenship. So we decided, as many women as could or whatever, we went to the Polish consulate outside, within Berlin, but in a whole different area. Somehow we got there. And by then there were hundreds of women screaming, "What's going on in Poland? Why are our men sent to Poland?" Then we found out that the Germans first wanted to get rid of all the Polish citizens because 99% of them were Jews. So they got rid of these Jews. And my father also, they were put on a train. And for hours and hours and days, nobody had any idea where he was or where that train went to. Then again, gradually the word spread that they were sent out of the car, out of the trains, and had a stand, and they were told they're in no man's land. That is the border between Germany and Poland. Border belongs to nobody. And there was my father and hundreds and hundreds of other Poles for 3 days in wind and weather. This was October. This was already very bad weather. With nothing to eat. And then gradually the Poles did open the gate. They let them into Poland up to a certain point. And as usual, other Jews, Polish Jews, heard about it, and they came running with food to help these men who had been standing there for hours and days, to give them some food. And eventually they put up some kind of shelter for these people. Now there were a lot of women in Berlin whose husbands were in Poland. A lot of them decided to leave everything behind, get on a train, which they could, and go to Poland. In a way, it was a very big mistake because they never could come back. They lost everything they had, and now they were being shoved around from one person to another. They didn't know what to do with these women. But again, the Jewish organizations formed quickly and helped these women to some degree. And in the meanwhile, once we found out where my father was, my mother was able to send a letter addressed to him at this border town, which she got, and then he was able to answer us. So by then we were able to send clothes, warm clothes to him in a suitcase because he only had what he had on his body. And all together, to make it short, he stayed there for 9 months. The name of the town in the area was called Spongy, which belonged to Poland, but part of it, I guess, was also German, just by the border. So once we found out where he was, then more people found out, and we were able to send him some clothes. My mother smuggled in between the clothes, she smuggled a gold watch, but there were no buyers. So he couldn't even turn that into money, as far as I know. And that's how he lived there for 9 months. In the meanwhile, while all these Polish people were in Spongin, Crystal Night was November 9th. But before that, they really started to demolish Jewish stores up until November 9th of 1938, when there was an open rebellion by the Germans. Mostly the young kids were sent to demolish all Jewish stores and went into the homes and threw out beds and feather beds and books. Then they had the book burning. Wherever they could get in, wherever they wanted to, they could get into any house and throw them on the street and burned books, Jewish books, Hebrew written books, prayer books, and they were dancing, and it was really unlivable anymore because we didn't know what the next thing would be. And gradually people disappeared, little by little. They just disappeared. They were taken away. My mother, who had been working for the Jewish Gemeinde, it's called, the Jewish authorities, in the nursery, the kindergarten. By then also the school, being I was in the Jewish school, that was closed right after Crystal Night, November 9th of 1938. 38, yeah. And then it was hell. You couldn't walk on the street, you were scared and everything else. The question was, what are all the Jewish women doing in Berlin while the men are incarcerated in no place, in no man's place, and what's going to happen to all of us? So after about 8.5 months of my father and most of the people still being in the no man's land border town of Sponging, quite a few women went over to make a life over there in Poland. But my mother would not do that. She definitely wasn't going to stay in Europe if she could possibly help it. So she, by luck, found out that you can book passage to get to Shanghai, China. Actually, that was the only place in the whole world that we as Jews could go to without permission, without passes. I wouldn't say without a passport, but we never needed them there. And so my mother rushed to the biggest tourist office and was able to get 3 passages. My father, for myself, and herself, to Shanghai, China. She went to the police department by herself, showed the passages that she booked, that she had paid for, and with that, they gave my father permission to come back home to Berlin for a short time, I think 2 weeks. In that time, we had to get ourselves together, get a big trunk, because we couldn't take anything but our personal stuff. Some people were able to take lifts, and, well, we were in no condition to do that or in anything. So we left by train from Berlin to Italy. And we stayed in Italy, I think 3 or 4 days. And then we found out that the ship that we were booked on was a Japanese half-freighter. It was not a luxury ship. But we were happy as long as we could get out of Germany. We got on the ship, and it was men and women separate. And the women and the men too were on the ship in bunks. So it wasn't like you had your bed or cabin. It was one large cabin just for the women and one large for the men and children depending on their sex. That's where we were put. There was a first class on that ship, and there were some Jewish people who somehow found out about it and got on, but that must have taken a tremendous amount of money. Okay, talk about passports. In Germany at that time, it didn't matter where you were born. It mattered for, like my mother, who was born in Germany, but married a Polish person from Poland. We all, and myself included, got Polish passport. So we were never considered German for a long time. Had we been considered German, our life would have been in many ways different. My parents would have been able to come to America almost immediately. But America closed the Polish quota. This is so pretty. So this is my Polish passport. So I'm considered a Polish. I arrived with my parents and a lot of other refugees in a half-freighter of the Suwa Mauro. Mauro means ship. We arrived in Shanghai on the 16th of August, 1939, and had no idea what's going to happen to us. The men still had their European clothes, warm coats, and in August the heat was over 100 degrees. It was unbearable. It was horrible. How we survived, I don't know. And we were brought to what was called Heime. That meant large barrack type buildings with beds stacked one over the other. So double stacked. We were all in one barrack. And it was beyond description. The heat and the danger of catching anything from anybody. We were like cattle in that place. The good thing was they did feed us. They had a kitchen and we stood in line to get food. Now all this money to feed us came mostly from America. I would say American Jews. But there was also a big Russian colony, White Russians they're called. They left Russia before the Reds took over, before the communists took over. But they were able to get out with everything they had. Also had made a lot of money. They were all very wealthy. And I would assume that we had gotten help from them too. I mean, we couldn't go around, who's helping us? We were glad we got help. But it was the most difficult way of living. It was beyond description. Through help of one of my relatives, we had some money and were able to rent a room from another immigrant who had more money, who had bought this little house, if you want to call it a house. So we got out of the Heime into a room, the three of us. And the people who owned that house, their name was Henner, Henner. And we lived there for quite a few years. Leah Young Road, 36. And we lived among the Chinese in a lane, and there was never a problem. We never had to fear that anything would happen to us by the Chinese at all. Until then, the British, Americans, and French had the say over Shanghai. On December 7th, it was my cousin Kurt's birthday. And at that time, we could go anywhere we wanted. And we went into what was then called the International Settlement, International Section. So we all went there and celebrated Kurt's birthday. But it was Pearl Harbor, as you know, Pearl Harbor Day. And by the time we got out of the International Settlement back into our area, which was called Honku, we heard a tremendous commotion and found out that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor that was near Hawaii. And then there were Italian ships in the Yangtze River, and that's the downtown section of Shanghai where all the big banks are, but a narrow river. And these big boats were lined up because some brought people and also merchandise, and it was an open port. So the Japanese scuttled these Italian ships, in other words, made them all lay on the side in the river. They used ropes right through the town, I don't even know how far, where they put them on something very solid. You know, I never found out where were these ropes anchored, so to speak. Never found out. And after Pearl Harbor, everything changed. The Japanese then decided that we couldn't just live anywhere. They made a district, and if people weren't living in that district, they had to move into that area, and that then became the Shanghai Ghetto. It's the only Jews. There were some Chinese people still living there, but basically it was all Jews, white Jews from all over. After Pearl Harbor, eventually, months later, we were bombed, and the bombs were from American bombers, B-29s, bombed all around Shanghai. They tried not to hit any civilian areas, but unfortunately, one Heime was bombed, where a lot of Jews died, and of course Chinese too, and that was a horrible thing. Here we thought we had gotten out and be safe with our lives, and it wasn't done maliciously. It was just a mistake by the bomber who happened to drop the bomb at the wrong place and at the wrong time. And till all of us who lived in the ghetto by then were able to get together and form some kind of a community center, took a long time. A lot of people actually also went to jail to be safe. You know, they were asked to have the doors open and let them come in. Now this went on for many months. Every morning at 10 o'clock, the bombs were flying. American B-29. They were trying to hit the water works, the electric works, wherever they could do big damage. I'm sure they knew that we were there, but this was more important, to get to the Japanese, because they were ruling Shanghai completely by then. And that's how we ended up in the ghetto. Mainly, the Japanese insisted that everybody gets vaccinated against malaria, against cholera, and so forth. And in order to be able to have some kind of count, if you want to call it, there was a big bridge. It was called the Garden Gate, the Garden Bridge. And anybody that passed over or went onto the bridge had to have this document that they were inoculated, vaccinated. Since I eventually got a job, first I worked in art to learn how to sew. I knew how to sew, but it gave me something to do. I was sewing and was not paid. It was just an occupational therapy. And then when the Japanese took over Shanghai completely, they issued these passes because it's Japanese and it's Polish. Because in Germany, you became the citizen of your father's, where your father was born. I also have to tell you about my two important jobs. During the ghetto time, we all tried to get some kind of work. Our parents couldn't work anywhere. So I was very lucky. I found out about a Japanese dentist who was educated here in America, and he was hiring refugee girls like myself. So we were 5 girls in the office. For chairside, for greeting, we had 2 girls, women who were already educated in making prostheses or crowns and so forth. And I was hired, and he taught me how to be a chairside assistant. But then there was one sad part to it. Being that he was American-oriented, spoke English quite well, they had taken all British and American and English personnel that lived in Shanghai and put them into detention in different camps. All these were high officials of their country, and they had kept Shanghai in some kind of order. You know, they were the keeper of Shanghai. But then when the Japanese took over, they put all these people into camps. And when Dr. Yamamoto was asked to be a dentist in one of these camps, he took one of us girls with him. Now, this is my story. I had to go with him in a rickshaw, a double rickshaw, where 2 people could sit. And with a long distance, it was called a pedicab, not a rickshaw. Pedicab is like a bicycle. A rickshaw the man runs. So my the dentist and I were seated in a pedicab and driven way out of town to where one of the camps were. And in the camp, he had helpers to look after the prisoners' teeth. When did it end?
August 25th, 1945.
Right. When the Japanese surrendered on a ship. And so, of course, I lost my job, but I was lucky because then America sent a lot of soldiers and Marines that had been all around the Asian countries into Shanghai, and they were our liberators. And that's how then we got out of the ghetto and we were free. And at that point, I got a job in the PX. There were a few PX open. Not everybody knows what a PX is, but that's a controlled warehouse, so to speak, or store, where any serviceman that comes in can be assured of buying merchandise at the right price. So they didn't have to go into Chinese stores and bargain. And I was very lucky. I was sent to a French lady who apparently had hoarded cultured pearls, Japanese Mikimoto pearls, and she taught me, and I was the sales girl of Japanese pearls. And of course I met a lot of young men and all different nominations, whatever you could think. Amongst them was a nice young man who was just a corporal and very sweet, and we fell in love, and he insisted that we were going to get married and that he wasn't going to go home without me, and had to go, in order to get permission to go home with me on the same boat, he finagled, if you want to call it that, to get to the Brigadier General who was in Pacusa, that's Manila. And he got himself face to face with the general. And as he asked him, "Soldier, what can I do for you?" And he said, "I'm only here to ask you, give me permission to take my wife back to the United States with me." "Well, where's your wife?" "Well, my wife is in Shanghai." He never asked how did he meet a girl in Shanghai, a white Jewish girl. But he finagled everything, and also was sent back to Shanghai, where we had met, and we were able to have a legitimate marriage ceremony sanctioned by an American high officer. I have pictures of that. And also the two lieutenants who were involved helping Dick to get permission to take me back on a troop transport. There weren't too many girls that were able to do that. So that's how I came to America safe and sound. My mother was able to come after America gave her permission because she had a Polish passport. Had she been able to have gotten a German passport, she could have come anytime, immediately. So this took many, many months. In the meanwhile, unfortunately, my father passed away, and she had to wind everything up by herself. And on December 7th, 1946, she arrived in New York by herself, and my husband and I were there to pick her up, of course, and she lived with us for many years. And thank God we got my mother out. And if my father could have drowned the Polish passport, he would have been very happy, because then he could have come here. Also, quite a few of my family were able to come to Shanghai. They traveled through Russia by train, which had to be an enormous feat. And at one point, they had to take a boat from Harbin to Shanghai. That was the only way, because there was no land connection from Russia into Shanghai. And my parents went, every Friday we heard a boat is going to come with some refugees, and sure enough, they came. And then one Friday night, they came back from the boat and said they have arrived, and went through the same routine as we did, and were welcomed into a home, a Heime. And that's where they stayed. And that's my family. Kurt, my cousin Lottie, and their son was born in Shanghai. Their last name is Heime. And since I, by then, was living in Poughkeepsie, that's where my husband had his home, we were able to help them come faster into the United States, but they chose not to come to Poughkeepsie, but to go to Denver, Colorado, because my cousin Kurt studied country and knew a lot about the United States and had read up on it, and he decided that Denver was the best place to live. And thank God they made it, and they came to Shanghai, plus his parents and a brother. All came and lived in Denver. We didn't get to see them often, but occasionally they were able to come and visit us. My mother would go to them and stay with them for months at a time, and it was wonderful for her that she had the family to be with. Meet my husband, Richard Shafran, and this is myself, Margot now Shafran, nee Grünfeld. We were married on March 10th in 1946. And we had a wonderful marriage. Then we came to the United States. I lived with my in-laws for many years until they passed away. And then we were able to move down here in Florida to Delray. We have a lovely place. Unfortunately, my husband died about 2 years ago, and our son died 10 days before my husband died. We have my son Ronald, who has given us much pleasure, and my daughter Anne is now in LA and has 2 wonderful children, a son named Spencer Lowell, and the daughter's name is Genevieve. And they're happy together, and she comes and visits me lately. And until just a year ago, I was able to visit them a lot, but now I can't travel so very well. But I'm grateful to have my cousin here, and anytime any of my family that's left can come, of course, makes me very, very happy. So here I ended up in Delray, Florida. And that's my story.